I remember that weekend vividly. A group of my friends and I decided to go camping deep in the woods, excited to escape the noise of the city. There were 5 of us: Mia, Jake, Sarah, Ben, and me, Zoe. We packed our tents, sleeping bags, and plenty of snacks, eager for an adventure. We arrived at our campsite just as the sun began to set. The sky turned beautiful shades of orange and purple, and I felt a thrill of excitement as we set up our tents. Once everything was ready, we gathered around the campfire, where the flames crackled and popped. The warmth of the fire felt comforting against the cool evening air. As the darkness settled in, Jake decided to tell a scary story. "They say this place is haunted," he began, his voice low. "A ghost wanders these woods, looking for someone to help it. If you hear a whisper in the trees, it's the ghost calling for you. But if you follow it, you'll never return." We all chuckled nervously, but the atmosphere felt thick with unease. Later, as we settled into our tents, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard Ida's soft whisper coming from outside. My heart raced. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Mia, who was in the tent with me. She shook her head, too tired to listen. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the wind. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Help me," the voice called softly from the trees. I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked at Mia, who was now wide awake. "What if it's true?" I asked, my voice trembling. She glanced at the tent flap, her face pale. Unable to resist, I unzipped the tent slightly and peered outside. The moonlight illuminated the campsite, casting long shadows between the trees. I didn't see anything at first, but the whisper came again. "Help me." I grabbed Mia's arm, pulling her closer. "We should wake the others," I suggested, but before I could move, I heard footsteps approaching our tent. The whispering grew louder, echoing around us. Panic set in. "Jake, Ben, Sarah," I shouted, but no one answered. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the tent shook as if something was pushing against it. I gasped and stumbled backward, and Mia covered her mouth in fear. We decided to stay silent, hoping whatever was outside would leave. But then the whisper changed, sounding more urgent. "Please, help Mem." It was no longer just a voice, it felt like a plea, a desperate cry for assistance. Then, in the distance, we heard the others laughing. Relief washed over me, but it quickly faded when I realized they were still around the campfire, unaware of what was happening. "Shh! We have to get out there!" I whispered frantically. As I unzipped the tent fully, I pulled Mia with me. We stepped outside, the cool night air hitting us like a wave. The campfire flickered in front of us, casting long shadows. But Jake, Sarah, and Ben weren't there. "Where are they?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. We called out their names, but the only response was the eerie whispering, now louder and more frantic. "Help me. Help me." Just then, I noticed something moving in the shadows by the trees. A figure emerged, its outline barely visible in the dim light. I could see a pale face, twisted in sadness. "Please, help Mum," it repeated. Frozen in fear, Mia and I exchanged terrified glances. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. The figure raised a hand, reaching for us, its eyes dark and empty. "Help me, before it's too late." Without thinking, I grabbed Mia's hand, and we ran back to the tent. We zipped it up tight, my heart racing as I listened to the whispers surround us. They felt like they were closing in, echoing off the trees. We huddled together, terrified and confused. "What do we do?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. All we could do was wait, hoping the sun would rise and chase away the darkness. As we sat there in fear, I thought about Jake's story. What if it was true? What if the whispers were real? And what happened to our friends? The night felt endless, filled with whispers and shadows. We could only hope that dawn would bring safety and answers. But deep down, I knew we would never forget the haunting voice that called out for help in the dark woods. It was a bright summer day when my friends and I decided to go camping in a remote forest. There were 4 of us: Alex, Lily, Mark, and me, Jamie. We packed our gear, excited for a weekend of adventure and fun. As we arrived at the campsite, the sun was shining and the birds were singing. We set up our tents near a beautiful, clear lake. The water sparkled under the sunlight, and everything seemed perfect. After exploring the area, we gathered around the campfire as night began to fall. Once the fire was crackling, Mark pulled out his guitar, and we sang songs, laughed, and roasted marshmallows. But as the night deepened, the mood changed. "Have you heard the stories about this forest?" Alex asked, his voice low. We all leaned in, curious. "They say it's haunted," Alex continued. "People who camp here have gone missing. At night, shadows move between the trees, and if you follow them, you'll never come back." The campfire flickered, casting strange shapes on the ground. We all laughed nervously, but I could feel a chill in the air. Later that night, while we were getting ready for bed, I heard something unusual. It sounded like soft whispers coming from the darkness. I peered out of the tent, but I couldn't see anything. "Did anyone else hear that?" I asked, but my friends shrugged it off, too tired to care. As I lay in my sleeping bag, the whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind. "Help us, help you us." I shivered, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. I closed my eyes tightly, but sleep wouldn't come. Suddenly, I was jolted awake. It was pitch black outside, and the whispers were now clearer and more urgent. "Help us." They seemed to be calling from the trees. I shook Mark awake, and he groaned, annoyed. "What is it, Jamie?" "Listen," I urged. He fell silent, and we both listened. The whispers surrounded us, swirling in the night air. "We need to wake the others," I said, my heart racing. Tent and found Lily and Alex huddled together, wide-eyed. "Did you hear it too?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. Before we could answer, the whispers changed, sounding more like cries. "Help us. Help you us." "Where is it coming from?" Alex asked, looking around. The trees loomed tall and dark, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The moonlight barely broke through the canopy, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I took a step toward the trees, drawn by the voices. "Wait!" Mark shouted, grabbing my arm. "We shouldn't go there." But I felt an urge to find out what was happening. "We can't just ignore it," I insisted. With our hearts pounding, we ventured deeper into the forest. The whispers grew louder, guiding us like a siren's call. "Help us! Help you us!" The sound echoed around us, making it hard to tell which direction it was coming from. As we walked, the shadows seemed to shift and move, almost alive. I could see figures darting between the trees, flickering just out of sight. "What if it's true?" Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if there really are lost souls here?" Suddenly, we stumbled into a small clearing. In the center stood an old, decrepit tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like twisted fingers. The whispers intensified, swirling around us. "Help us! Help you us!" I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. "We need to leave, now!" I shouted, but before we could turn back, the ground shook, and the shadows around us thickened. The figures materialized, ghostly shapes with hollow eyes, their faces twisted in sorrow. "Help us! Help you us!" they cried, their voices echoing in our minds. I felt a pull toward them, an urge to reach out. "We can't stay here," Mark yelled, breaking the spell. We turned and ran, dodging the outstretched arms of the shadows. As we sprinted back through the trees, the whispers grew frantic. "Stay, help you us." But we didn't look back. We ran until we reached our campsite, our hearts racing and fear coursing through our veins. Breathless, we gathered around the campfire, the flames flickering wildly. The shadows lingered at the edges of the light, watching us. "What were they?" Alex asked, his voice shaking. "What do they want?" "I don't know," I replied, still trembling. "But we shouldn't have followed them." We stayed up the rest of the night, watching the shadows dance in the darkness, whispering our fears to one another. When the sun finally rose, we packed our things quickly, leaving the haunted forest behind. But even as we drove away, I could still hear the whispers in my mind, a haunting reminder of the night we encountered the forest of shadows. My friends and I had been planning this camping trip for weeks. There were 4 of us: Chris, Mia, Jake, and me, Ava. We were excited to spend a weekend under the stars at a remote campsite by a lake. When we arrived, the sun was shining and the smell of pine filled the air. We set up our tents and decided to explore the area. After a few hours of hiking, we returned to the campsite. The sun was setting, casting a beautiful orange glow over the lake. We gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Everything felt perfect until Chris mentioned the legend of the forest. "Did you guys know this place is supposed to be haunted?" he said, his voice low. "They say a girl went missing years ago, and if you listen closely at night, you can hear her calling for help." We all laughed nervously, brushing off his words, but a chill ran down my spine. Later that night, after we crawled into our tents, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then just outside, I heard a soft voice. "Help me, help Mum." My heart raced. Was it just my imagination? I sat up, listening closely. The voice was faint but persistent. "Help me." I unzipped the tent and peeked outside. The moonlight illuminated the campsite, but everything seemed still and quiet. Did anyone hear that?" I whispered to Mia, who was in the tent with me. She shook her head, too tired to care. "It's probably just an animal," she said, but I wasn't convinced. I decided to wake Chris and Jake. "Guys, I think I heard something," I said, shaking them gently. They groaned but eventually sat up, rubbing their eyes. "What is it?" Chris asked. "I heard a voice outside," I replied. "It sounded like someone was calling for help." Jake shrugged. "It's probably just the wind, Ava. Let's go back to sleep." But the whispers continued, growing louder. "Help me." It felt like the voice was right outside our tents. Fear gripped me. "We should check it out," I said, my voice trembling. With a flashlight in hand, we stepped outside. The campfire flickered, casting long shadows around us. I felt a knot in my stomach as the whispers grew louder. "Help me," they called, echoing through the trees. "Where is it coming from?" Mia asked, glancing around nervously. I pointed toward the woods. "It sounds like it's coming from there." Against their better judgment, we ventured into the trees, drawn by the voice. "We shouldn't be doing this," Chris muttered, but I felt an overwhelming urge to find the source. We can't just ignore it. As we walked deeper into the forest, the shadows danced around us, and the air grew colder. "Help me," the voice cried again, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Suddenly, I saw something moving between the trees, something pale and shimmering. "Did you see that?" I whispered, pointing. They nodded, eyes wide. The figure looked like a girl, her hair long and tangled. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice echoing in the night. "Please." I felt a mix of fear and compassion. "We need to help her," I exclaimed, but Chris grabbed my arm. "No, this isn't right. We should go back." The shadows around us seemed to close in, and I hesitated. "Please, help me," the girl whispered again, stepping closer. I could see her face, now pale and sad, eyes filled with longing. My heart ached for her. "We can't leave her," I insisted. But as I took a step forward, the girl's expression changed. Her eyes widened in panic. "No, don't come closer," she cried, her voice rising in fear. "You don't understand. You'll be trapped here too." Confusion washed over me. "What do you mean?" I asked, but before she could answer, the ground shook and the shadows grew darker. I felt a pull, as if the forest was trying to keep me here. "Run!" Jake yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me back. We turned and ran, the whispers growing frantic behind us. "Help me! Help me!" echoed through the trees as we sprinted back to the campsite. We burst into the clearing, breathless and terrified. The campfire was still burning, but everything felt different. The shadows were longer, the air heavier. "What just happened?" Mia gasped, her face pale. "I don't know," I replied, shaking. "But we shouldn't have gone into the woods." We huddled around the fire, trying to calm our racing hearts. The whispers faded but lingered in our minds, a haunting reminder of the girl who called for help. As the night wore on, we took turns keeping watch, jumping at every rustle and sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had escaped something terrible. When dawn finally broke, we packed our things quickly, eager to leave the haunted forest behind. But as we drove away, I glanced back at the trees. I could still hear the whispers in my mind, a chilling reminder of the last camp autumn that would stay with me forever,